Mund të duket e pabesueshme, por personi me të cilin do të bashkëbisedoj tani është vërtet jashtëzakonisht i talentuar në shumë fusha. Fare mirë mund të nisni me të një bisedë rreth poezisë, për shembull, sepse ai është një poet. Me të edhe mund të bashkëbisedonim rreth muzikës, sepse ai është një instrumentist dhe këngëtar i Zotit. Në fakt, ai luan me bandën e tij në sallonet muzikore më me emër në Florida të Shtetet Bashkuara të Amerikës. Por ajo për cilën unë e kam ftuar është fusha e edukimit, sepse Dr. Sanford Shugart është presidenti i Kolegjit të Valencias në Orlando, Florida, i cili çdo vit ju shërben rreth 70.000 studentëve, nga të cilët 95% ja dalin të gjejnë punë. Sanford Shugart ka një doktoraturë në mësimdhënie nga Universiteti i Karolinës së Veriut. Dr. Shugart, thank you for accepting my invitation to have this conversation together.
It's my pleasure.
How did you decide between poetry, music, and education that education should be your life career?
Well, I'm not sure I decided. I think it picked me as much as I picked it. So to me, poetry, music, the creative life is just a part of being alive. I grew up in a musical household and a reading household, and it was always a part of our lives. And I didn't go to college to find a career. I went to college because I had questions that I wanted to answer, and the careers kind of came to hand. And I think of my work in education as important and engaging, and also a laboratory just for learning how to live with other human beings.
I learned also that your three siblings went to Juilliard to do school.
They all studied music in New York, one way or another. My older brother is still a cellist, and my youngest sister is still a violist. My other sister was a violinist who became an entrepreneur in the entertainment world, and has recently sold her company and retired. So yeah, we all had connections in the arts and music, and I still do. I still write and compose and perform. And what I do artistically feeds what I do professionally, and vice versa. They're necessary to each other for me.
What instrument do you play?
So I play a number of things. My best instrument today is guitar.
In 2011, the college that you administrate has earned Aspen Prize, which I think is the highest prize that a community college can earn in the United States.
Yes.
In 2015, the magazine Washington Monthly, based in Washington, D.C., I think, which is known for ranking community college and universities in the United States, has ranked you among 10 most innovative community college and university presidents in the nation. How do you explain all this success? What kind of teaching practices and events has played a role in your formation?
Yeah. So I never set out to be innovative or to be recognized for anything. I think my interest, and this comes partly from the arts, is just to do good work. And good work is focused on the outcome and impact you want to have, not so much on how you're recognized or how you get there. But it is helpful to have a creative life that informs your professional life. I think that most people go to work and leave the best parts of themselves at home. So they may bring what skills they have, competence, and they may bring a little bit of social capacity for making friendships and that sort of thing. But they leave so much of themselves at home when they go to work. They leave their creativity, their vulnerability, their willingness to fail, their capacity to love and forgive. All these things that make us human are somehow unwelcome in the place of work, or we think they are. So part of my job has been to make sure that I bring all of myself to my work, whatever the work is, and make it safe for other people to bring all of who they are to work. To me, work is a gift, not a curse, and it was meant to help us discover who we are, what our purpose in the universe is, how we serve others. Work ought to be nourishing, not depleting. It ought to be enlarging instead of diminishing. And a good bit of my professional life has been trying to explore how to create that environment for other people.
Great. So I've learned that when you were in college, you went through a faith experience. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, there's nothing spectacular about my conversion to Christian faith. I grew up in a wholesome household, and a household where mostly people kind of went to church. But I never had an encounter with real, authentic Christianity until I was in my teens or 20s, really. And because I had both an artistic and a scientific outlook, I'm trained as a scientist, I sort of assumed that Christianity was like other religions, and it was all mythology that primitive people believed. And it was like whistling in the dark. It made them feel safe, but it wasn't real. And I discovered in college two things. One is that I wasn't complete, that I had needs and failures that I couldn't fix, that the human condition is to be flawed, and I knew I was flawed and discovered in a number of ways as I was becoming independent in life. And second, that the Christianity I thought was out there was a caricature, a bad sketch of what Christianity really is, and that it was possible for me to take the claims of the Christian faith and the life and historical life of Jesus, including his resurrection, seriously, intellectually. So I like to tease people and say, I've discovered that Jesus came to take away my sins, not my mind. And in the university, I was fortunate enough to encounter people who loved me unconditionally, but also had rigorous lives of the mind and were faithful Christians. And that's the first time I'd ever seen that. And that to me was very compelling. And so I didn't jump in right away. I explored. I had lots of questions. In fact, I went to university with questions. And these were among the best. What makes truth true? How do you know a truth claim is legitimate? How do you deal with the human condition? You look all around you and realize there's something has gone badly wrong. And what's good about the universe, and how do we cultivate that? Make the world a place where all of creation, humans and all the rest of creation, can flourish together rather than depleting one another and using each other up. It occurred to me early in my life that that Christian words sometimes are misunderstood, and one of them is sin. I'd heard preachers rail against people's sinfulness most of my life, and it never really clicked. When I discovered that what I thought sin was a small subcategory, misbehavior, immoral activity, whatever. The real essence of sin, I discovered, was my problem. And my problem was that I thought I was in charge of my own life, beginning to end, that my freedom was the highest value, and that I had all the wisdom I would need to lead a good life. And that I also discovered that sin is a kind of perverted love. It's easy to misunderstand it. It's a kind of love that consumes the object of its desire, uses it up. So you can see this in lots of personal relationships where people declare that they love each other, but they're actually using each other. And when they're no longer useful to each other, they move on, dump the other person or whatever. So all that came together for me when I was about 19 or 20. And I encountered these people who were a little peculiar and loved each other in spite of that peculiarity, sometimes because of it. And I thought maybe they could love me too. And I respected the way they lived their lives and the way they thought about life in the world. As a scientist, I respected it. And I thought, I need to learn more about that. So I dove in, and eventually led to me declaring myself to be a follower of Jesus Christ and believing in the historical resurrection after much examination, and beginning to put together a way of living and a worldview that was aligned to what the scriptures, the Bible has to say. Discovered that the world was made a certain way, and that to live differently was to live against the grain, and that explained a lot of why the world's not doing very well.
Now, you mentioned that you make sure you bring all of yourself at work. Also, you don't leave those at home. Now, how do you bring faith at work?
Well, the most important way for us to bring our whole selves and our faith to work is to live it before you speak it. So the core of Christian faith is called the law of love. It's about loving other people. You love them whether they deserve it or not, because you're loved even though you don't deserve it. So learning how to practice that, to act always with complete integrity, to be gracious, even forgiving towards other people, not to keep careful accounts, to set as the object and purpose of your work lifting up other people, serving your community and other individuals. So what the Bible says about the goal of life is to, quote, bring the kingdom of God. It's hard language for modern people to unpack. All that means is to engage in work and relationships that put the world right again, the way God designed it. And the way God designed the world was to work well, to flourish, to be fruitful, to be wealthy in the true sense of wealth. So the center of wealth isn't how much money you have, it's how rich your heart is, how rich your spirit is, how wealthy we are in human and all really the health of all life.
Now, concerning wealth, I know that when you offered to take the position of president at Valencia, you did not negotiate the salary. Why so?
Well, I get asked that a lot, and honestly, I've turned down raises for years as well. So for, 15, 18 years, the board of trustees that governs our college has offered substantial raises to me, and I always turn them down for several reasons. One is I'm well cared for. So to be wealthy is to need less, not to have more. And when you burden yourself with too much, you spend all your time taking care of your stuff rather than taking care of your mission in life. So I want to be careful about that. And the Christian scriptures teach us to live as simply as you can. Not to punish yourself. It's not an ascetic life where you deprive yourself. It's more being sober about the choices you make. It's more important to do this than that. So one reason I've been careful about that is to say I have enough, and more than enough is too much. The second is we live in a materialistic world where people value one another on the basis of what they can produce and earn, and that's just wrong. And in America, it's especially exaggerated. So we have CEOs of companies in America that make 600 times more than the entry-level employees, just obscene salaries. Not only is that bad for the people that they're serving, but it creates a divide, a gulf between people. And I think to be a really influential leader, you have to have the trust and the commitment of the people you lead. And one of the things they'll judge you on is whether you have their best interests at heart. So if they see me accumulating everything for myself and leaving them in need, why should they trust me? And why should they behave in ways that are selfless and committed to our mission? So I think building any kind of healthy community is to be sure that everyone has enough. Everybody doesn't have to have the same, but everyone has enough. And that they're held accountable for, earning that.
I want to take advantage to ask you some questions on leadership. And I'm thrilled to announce that our organization has just printed your book. So
thank you.
On the list of being a poet, musician, and in education, so you also are an author. So I think the English title will be Leadership in the Crucible of Work.
Yes.
So why another book on leadership? I noticed here that subtitle is Discovering the Interior Life of an Authentic Leader. Is this what makes this book special?
So it's a great question. There have been lots of books written on leadership. And to tell you the truth, I would probably have not used the leadership in the title. The publisher wanted to be sure to use that name. I would have just called it work. All good work requires dealing with the crucible there where work is performed. So let me see if I can explain that. I discovered early in my life that going to work had risks. And one of the risks, the risk that's most overlooked, is that over time, you're shaped by what you do. And particularly if you're successful. So the tools you use, the habits of thought, the way you earn success shapes your character. And very, very many people have their characters misshapen by their work. They become somebody they never wanted to be. And they get twisted into, a difficult, angular, selfish, ungenerous, defensive human being. They might become a micromanager. They might become a tyrant. There are all sorts of dysfunctional habits that you see in leaders in all kinds of organizations. And it was a revelation to me that they didn't all start out that way. They became that way at work. So one reason for writing the book was to document my own journey, where I had to discover that in order for work to be good, which is to say work that nourished people instead of depleting them, work that enlarged them instead of diminishing them, work that took you on a journey instead of put you in a rat race. For that to happen, we had to begin to pay attention to our interior lives again and who we were becoming while we do what we do in the world. And I've done that for more than 30 years, almost 40 years now, largely by journaling and prayer and paying attention to who I'm becoming and the environment I create for other people. The other reason I wrote the book is that almost all leadership books are about technique. You know, the 7 habits, the 5 good ideas, the 100 immutable laws. You know, there are all sorts of books out there that are how-to books. And my experience was the problem isn't a how-to problem. It's not a problem of technique. It's a problem of character. What we really need most in leaders are leaders of deep character. A person with character and limited technique can still do good. A person with lots of technique and limited character can only do harm. More harm. The more technique they have, the more harm they can do. We've had enough of ego-centered leaders who have a lot of technique. What we need are character builders, people who are selfless servants who find themselves in leadership.
Hitler didn't lack technique, for example.
You can justify almost any harm to other human beings if A, you can convince yourself you're creating some kind of legacy for the future, and B, you have a lot of resources at your command to do things. So again, ego-centered leaders are just dangerous. And we've had enough of them. Really, the followers need to demand that we have leaders of deep character.
So is this what you mean when you say that the most important work of a leader is the work he does inside himself?
On the inside, that's right. So everything I do at work every day, all the ordinary struggles and challenges, the conflicts, the personnel issues, competition, all those things, I experience just like everybody else does, but they become raw material for my interior workshop. I retreat to my workshop, which is my journal, and I pray and process, and I write to myself. No one else gets to read this, and no one is intended to, but it's where I have the honest conversation. Why am I envious of that person? Why do I feel threatened by her? Who am I becoming while I do this work? What do I care most about in this decision? What principles am I using to navigate this difficult place? What am I willing to suffer to do the right thing? These are the important questions that get asked in the journal on everyday events. And what happens over time is you learn how to do this. It took me time to do this. But what you do in the world becomes raw material for the workshop. What you do in the workshop becomes the new tools you use in the world. And this dialogue between interior work and exterior work makes you more healthy. And if you're fortunate, as I am, I get to work in education and healthcare, then the interior work can connect to an exterior work that connects to some great work in the world. Not everybody gets to do that. But I have a deep sense of privilege that what I'm doing is connected to God's work in the world in some way, that human flourishing, healing through my hospital work, and liberation through education, through our higher education work, are both great causes that I love.
Dr. Shugart, how about the question, is a leader born or he becomes one? How do you answer that?
That's a great question. On the whole, I would say leaders aren't born. Human beings are born, in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but character is at the center of leadership, and you're not born with character. You're born with instincts, you're born with talents, you're born with habits, capabilities, but character is formed over time. It's not enough to be trained. I know there are a lot of leadership training programs. That's about technique. Right? So I'll give you an example. Listening, as you know, is an important part of leadership. Now, I can train anyone to become a better listener. There are certain techniques. We all know them. Look me in the eye. Don't look at the parrot on my shoulder. Open body posture, not closed. Ask leading questions. Confirm your understanding. I think you're saying this. Listen all the way through the other person before you think about what you're going to say back. Don't judge them, even with nonverbal cues. Let them speak. All these are techniques you can learn. I can train you to do those things in an hour. And if you'll practice them, within a few weeks, people will notice you're a better listener, and you'll be a better leader for it. Here's what I can't teach you in an hour. I can't teach you that guy that really bugs you, that irritates you, by saying the same foolish thing in this same meeting every year might be worth listening to. He may have something to say you need to hear, even though he bothers you. Because that's a matter of humility. And leaders need humility. And humility can't be trained. And you're not born humble. Humility is a character matter. And character is formed over a long period of time, like a glacier. It changes, it moves, it can be shaped, but over a long period of time. By reflection on your own experience and by the touchstones in your life. Where do you get your orientation in the world? If you're orienting your world from the center of your own ego, then you're eccentric. If you orient your world from the center of the creator of the world, the one who designed the world, then you can live a whole life. So I would say leaders are formed over a long period of time, because leadership's mostly about character. To that, you can add training and technique, but that doesn't make you a leader.
Now, concerning listening, for example, I know most of the books on leadership will emphasize the importance of learning how to be a good listener. Now, in your book, I think you want to help leaders also learn how to not listen. It seems counterintuitive. Can you explain this more?
That's a good question too. So for the most part, nearly every truth you can name has a little paradox associated with it. So, there's a time to take charge, and there's a time to let go. There's a time to forgive, and there's a time to hold accountable. And there's a time to listen, and there's a time not to listen. So listening is immensely empowering to the people you work with. You're affirming their humanity. You're hearing their story. It's a way of loving other people. Listening is an act of love. But there's also a time when people are fearful, selfish, doubting, and those voices come to you as a leader. Every great risk I've taken in service of our mission and our future has had doubters around who will say, don't do that.
With the purpose to discourage? What was it?
Yes, discouraging voices. And, most of those voices come from within. I call them the sock puppets. So, your own doubts arise. Who are you to do this? Who are you to declare this new strategy? Why should anyone trust you? We're all full of self-doubt. The people who come across as totally confident are usually trying to convince themselves because they have the most self-doubt. So learning to live with those doubts and not listen to them all the time. So there's a time when you say, I'm going to do this even though it's fearful for me. I like to explain it this way, that we talk about our passion. You must be passionate about what you do. I think most people misuse that word. What they really mean is enthusiastic. So this is true in personal relationships too. You'll hear a couple say to, I'm passionate about her, I'm passionate about him. They're really mostly enthusiastic, meaning they're breathless when they're around each other. Passion isn't about being enthusiastic. The root of the word passion in Latin is passio, and it means to suffer. The things you're passionate for are the things you're willing to suffer for. I am passionate about my children. I'll suffer anything for them. I'm passionate about my wife. I will suffer anything for her well-being. So if you ask the question, what are you passionate about at work? What are you willing to suffer for? What risks personal risks are you willing to take as the leader in service to others? It'll tell you a lot about yourself. And that's where the not listening comes from. Because most of the messages of doubt that I send to myself are about limiting my liability, protecting myself, being careful, particularly in service to others. And I have to cut that off and say, no, I know what the right thing to do is here. And there's no compromising with wrong.
Dr. Shugart, in your book, you also warn that people who use other people, or leaders who use people as tools or objects, that kind of attitude will affect negatively not only those people, but also the leader himself. So I want to ask you, how have you managed this in your life as a leader, to not use other people? What has helped you?
That's a great question too. So let me answer it on two levels. Sort of on the practical level, how do I pay attention to the way I'm treating other human beings to make sure I'm not using them, is one set of questions. So there's several things to do. One is, it's very hard to take advantage of somebody you're praying for. So I have a discipline of praying for all the people that I work directly with. And then I pray for my organization in general. And mostly I'm not praying for success or prosperity. I'm praying for health and the spirit of the place. And we treat each other well and have a healthy heart. And if I keep myself focused there, recognizing that I set the tone for the rest of the organization, then I can be safer with my responsibility for other people. I mean, to be a leader is to take serious responsibility for the welfare of other people. It weighs on you. You have to care about that. It's the people, not the organization, you're taking responsible for. So practically, I pray, I listen, I spend time, I ask them, I invite criticism, I want to know what their hopes and aspirations are so I can support them. So it's my job to know for everybody who reports to me where they'd like to go in life, what they'd like to accomplish, where their sense of mission is. And my job is to fan that into flame and encourage them. Sometimes it's to encourage them to leave, to pursue their dream, or because they've picked the wrong job to fulfill their aspirations in, for example. At a much higher level, I would say I have to keep reminding myself of the way the universe works. So you don't have to be a Christian to believe this. But when people ask me, what do you mean how the universe works? I'll say, well, there are really only two ways to look at the universe. And one says, look around you. everyone you see is temporary. They're only here for a minute. We're all aware of our mortality. We're going to all pass away. So what must matter is what's left behind when you're gone. The poetry you've written, the organizations you've built, the wealth you've accumulated, the power of your family, the legacy that you've created. And it's a very tempting vision of the universe because we all know we're mortal. The problem is, by the way, this is called materialism. The problem with it is you can justify almost any harm to another human being for the sake of some legacy you've imagined. You mentioned someone who did that earlier. And this is very, very common. The other way of looking at the universe is to say, look around you. Everything you see is temporary. It's called the second law of thermodynamics, right? Everything is degrading. Except, in some way I can't quite explain, the person across the table from you. We've all entertained the hypothesis that there's something about persons that transcends time. That when everything else is gone, something remains of you. We use language, eternal life and heaven and things like that, but it's colorful language. What it really means is that at its root, one hypothesis says the universe is really personal and stuff is temporary. And if I choose that hypothesis, I think that's more accurate. I think it speaks better to human experience and human history. And I say that as a scientist. There's something transcendent about human personality. There is really something transcendent about all of creation that we're a part of. And I would say, for me, behind all that is person with a capital P. That the universe at some level is personal. There's a personal mind and heart and spirit behind everything that holds everything up. Without that, life and history is meaningless. It's just sound and fury signifying nothing. With that, there's the potential for meaning, for direction in our story, for purpose in life.
I really appreciate what you said. In light of that, what would be like a final message for our viewers?
It's very easy to get dragged into the day-to-day realities that we experience and become really pragmatic and not even ask the big questions anymore. When you're worried about whether you can feed your family, it's hard to ask what the meaning of life is. I mean, I get that. But the whole trajectory of human history has been about putting ourselves in a position where we can ask the big questions and let the big questions inform the little questions instead of the other way around. So the first thing I would say is get back in touch with the big questions, the questions of meaning and purpose and direction. Everything else flows from there. If you don't ask those questions, you're actually a prisoner. No, the only way to freedom is to ask the big questions. And the second thing I would say is I found the answers to those questions in a real event in human history and a real person who actually lived. His name was Jesus Christ. And the evidence of history is hard to argue against. He really lived. He really died. He really was resurrected. It's hard to explain it any other way. And he really does continue to change the world in a way that no one else ever has.
Wow. Thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation together. I really appreciate all what you said. And hopefully in your next visit in Albania, we will find time to talk about other areas where you excel, poetry and music. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you.